Morning, everyone. As Ignacio said, my name's Mike Parkot. I run and operate Always Something Farm. See a lot of familiar faces out here. So that's kind of a comforting thing there.
My name is Greg Putney. Me and my wife and my two daughters run Rising Swine Farm in Holland. Last year, we put on a retail store on the farm, and we're just finishing up the butcher shop. Should be running hopefully within another month, and then we got approved through the town already to put in a USDA slaughter floor, so that'll be the next project over the summer.
So one of the things it's kind of weird that two people that are predominantly pig farmers have come together and actually agree on anything. And so we started to realize as we were both trying to grow our farms, and my personal farm story, like I grew up in Amherst. I grew up at the corner of Main and Harlem, and then I lived in Ithaca for a little while. We wound up moving back, and then we were having trouble finding access to like farm fresh food. Out there, way more developed local food system, distribution, farmers markets, way more developed than what we had here. So we started out on 1/8 of an acre in Clarence, and we started raising broiler chickens, and it's still the nicest lawn in the town. But we were rotating them around through that, and then eventually we moved out, actually just down the street from Mr. Garino out in Darien. He's on the Erie County side. But we moved out there. We started out with poultry, then we started trying to scale things up. We started realizing that there wasn't enough hours in the day because I was still working full-time and then working more than full-time because we didn't want to go into any debt to do anything. So at some points there were stretches where I was working 21, 30, 60 days straight between two different jobs, but we were able to build things up. Then as time passed, we needed to narrow our focus down with a growing family, things like that. And our main thing that we do now is pigs. So we raise a lot of pork. We've been pretty prevalent in the local restaurant industry. Most of our animals were going to that. We were also doing some poles and halves. And then just the way that things kind of worked out during COVID, we wound up going into retail sale with appointments that we had booked a year and a half before that. So retail selling of meat is arguably difficult due to the access to slaughter processing. And that's part of the reason where Greg and I got to know each other, because we were both looking for a solution to do this.
Yeah, we kind of had almost kind of a similar story. We started our farm, it was on 16 acres, and then we ended up moving. So that kind of gave us a clean slate to start over from what we learned. So our farm right now is 120 acres. It's all grass pasture based systems that we use. We do beef, pork, chicken, layers, and we have some beehives on the farm also. We're pretty close. If you guys are all like Salatin style, that's kind of the way our farm is and everything is kind of laid out. So our cows are moving every day. Our pigs are moving every 7 to 10 days. Our chickens are moving once to twice a day, the meat birds, and the layers are moving almost every day. So the farm that we're on was abandoned for about 60 years. So it's all overgrown. So there was no fences, no water, no roads, no, pretty much nothing. So I have another full-time job. I'm a lineman for National Grid for my day job. So that's a nice 80 to 100 hour a week job on top of this. So my biggest thing was making everything on the back end of the operation super efficient for my time. So in the summertime, when I can move my cows, do all the chicken chores, everything else, it roughly takes me about 20 to 35 minutes to move everything on the farm. The biggest thing that we did is put in an underground gravity fed water system. So we have roughly 7,500 feet of water line in the ground that we put in. So I literally go over, flip the switch, fill the 3,000 gallon tanks, and it's all gravity fed from there on out. So anywhere on the front half of my farm, I can hit water within 200 feet. So I'm not hauling anything. That saved us roughly 12 to 15 hours a week just doing that. So, and getting to know Greg and seeing the way that his farm runs, I've been learning an awful lot from him and starting to try to adopt some of those practices towards our farm. And
we're looking at putting in a water system this year. But some of the other things, though, we're talking about collaborative working environments and collaborative farm enterprises together. One of the things that we actually started doing is we started hosting an illegal farmers market. So the illegal farmers market, Laura was actually one of the vendors with us. Oh, it was a great time, but the zoning officer in Darien didn't think it was.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we noticed, like trying to figure out with food and with farm and ag enterprises, why do people still go to grocery stores? They're going there because it's convenient, it's easy, you can pick up everything at once. So even if you're starting small, you're doing something. So say that you're doing cut flowers and Dan, you've got some vegetables. Laura's got microgreens. Gentleman here in the green polo's got chickens. Somebody else has lamb. Build a network of people that are doing things different from what you have, and then figure out a way to come together. Check with your local zoning board is my personal advice. I mean, they'll threaten you with jail, which sounded like a vacation to me. But when you get those people together and people can source multiple things from local vendors all at the same time, not only are you giving them an opportunity for a convenient transaction, what you're also doing is you're getting people that are in the same headspace as you are with that. You're going to find people that are going to encourage you. You're all going to be talking about, okay, well, this is the problem that I have right now. And although I might be raising pigs, it may be a similar problem to what Laura had. And, oh, this is how I did this. Or, hey, I could introduce you to this person who might be really interested and engaged with your products and things like that. So that's kind of like what you guys did with the store too.
Yeah, so our store that we have about 20 local vendors, all local. Like some people say they're local, but these are local. Like Holland, East Aurora, really close. We bring in milk from Teacup Dairy. My wife goes to get it. We got a couple different cheese companies in there. And when we do 2 farm tours a year, and the last one that we had, we actually brought Mike's illegal market out to ours because it was legal, supposedly. But we had all the vendors there. There was a whole bunch of them. We had Babs and B&W, the microgreens, and we had a couple other people there. Our beekeeper was there doing a class, and everybody asked, like, well, why would you guys have those there if you're trying to sell your stuff? It was our highest day for the store, and you guys, I think,
I almost sold out.
Yeah.
Which is probably the only market that happened at.
Yeah, we had roughly 130 people at the farm tour that day, and they were coming for that reason, you know, to see a different way of farming and different products and stuff like that. So,
but the local food movement, like that collaboration and everybody working together, like he and I raise very similar products, like his pork and my pork, like we're both raising pasture raised or forest raised pork. There is so much room for expansion. There's so many people that aren't sourcing from people like us already that we can work together. And that's kind of how we came to working together with this butcher shop idea. So about 1.5 years ago, I was experiencing the same delays. Like I'm driving to, where's Sylvester's?
Westfield, Pennsylvania.
Westfield, Pennsylvania. I'm driving to New Wilmington, Pennsylvania. I'm driving to Sugar Grove, Pennsylvania. I'm on cancellation lists at 6 or 7 different slaughterhouses to try to get animals in. And some of those days it's Monday afternoon. Hey, we had a cancellation for tomorrow. Do you want the spot? We got 3 pigs open. And you have nothing left in the freezer to sell, and you have people calling you looking for product. Yes, I'll be there. And then it's, okay, I got to get there by 5:30 so that I can get home by 7 and make it to work at 8. So those logistics and that time spent, I was starting to, and I had an interest in butchering. Like it's something that I started learning mostly just to explain what I was selling to people, or when they were doing cut sheets to be able to explain, well, this is a pork steak. This is where it comes from. This is how you have to cook it. And I started doing our own animals for us. And then it just kind of spiraled from there where more and more like, okay, oh, my neighbor down the street's got a couple of lambs. Yeah, I'll buy a lamb from you and then cut it up for the family. And I taught myself how to do that stuff, and a lot of good videos online how to do it too. But I started looking at like trying to find an old USDA butcher shop. But the closest one that I could find was $650,000. So, but that's before updating it to current. So you're really looking probably 750, 850, 900. maybe even $1 million. There's people that have built butcher shops, like there's one out in the Finger Lakes where he built it 15 years ago for 6 cows and like 8 pigs a week is roughly what they do. And he spent $1.8 million to build that plant. There's a new plant going in Attica. They're doing a lot of the work themselves. They own a construction company, which is cool, but they're over $2 million to get that plant up and running. So at that point, like I was talking to Greg and he was talking to me about evolving like their farm and access to retail butchering and utilizing my plant for doing the slaughter work. And then he was going to have his own cut shop there, which that plan's kind of evolved as we've gone too.
Yeah, so when we put the retail store on, obviously it all has to be USDA slaughtered for individual sale. Our primary sales up until that point were bulk. So Mike was really kind of gearing towards the restaurant market. We were all just bulk to customers. So we've had the same customers for years. And when there was starting to be the drive towards more of a retail side. So we went that route and put the store on the farm. And it's the same thing, the same story. You talk to any protein farmer, I mean, Lee will tell you, they're all around. Everybody's on a wait list. There's nowhere to get in. And there's more that are closing this year that are going to make it even harder. So we started talking, and the way we're doing it is our butcher shop is technically going to be a 20C and a state inspected facility. And then with the USDA kill floor. So that'll be dual inspected also. So it'll be federal and state inspected. And that gives us the option for a 20C to be able to sell, smoke our own products, whatever we need, and it'll be legal for sale for us through our retail stores. So
one of the things that's interesting with that state level of inspection, that 20C, is you can have multiple 20C licenses registered to the same physical location. So a lot of like your food trucks, they use commissary kitchens that are certified 20C facilities. So you might have 6 or 7 people working in that shop, like in that 20C shop that they're doing all their prep so that they can get out with their food truck, because anybody who's bought food from a food truck, you cannot prep for 200 people in a 4x6 space. You might be able to heat it up, plate it, and get it out, but you're going to have to put some work in before that. So we've kind of united and joined plans with this. What we've been doing and what we've been looking at is there's other farms. There's one farm locally that's had 40 cows canceled on them this year heading into farmers market season that they sell at retail. You don't even, like, that's probably $32,000 to $35,000 worth of processing that somebody canceled on them because they don't have staff to run their facility and they can't fit them in. So we can stack these licenses. We're going to be opening the business. I get to fulfill my dream as having a butcher shop. I also don't have to worry about access for my own animals. Greg doesn't have to worry about access for his animals. But look at the animal welfare standpoint of him having that shop right there at the farm. You can walk him from the pasture right down to the butcher shop and the kill floor. So there's multiple things there, but also being able to provide access for other local farms by synergistically stacking each other and everybody having their own 20C license and paying us as a contractor to do their actual butcher work. With that being said, anytime you're going into a collaborative agreement, is we've been discussing, like with attorneys and other things, really firm, strong boundaries. So like for us, the way that we worked it out is with this butcher shop, I'm coming in as an employee rather than an owner. I have equipment that I'm bringing with me that remains mine, but I'm not investing in the physical structure and the property on his farm. So we're planning with this that if things don't work out, start with planning your exit strategy, where if things don't work out when you're collaborating, that you've got a way that it makes it clean and then it doesn't get messy and then you're all tied up in court instead of doing your farm work. So this is, I mean, we don't anticipate that happening, but it happens to a lot of people, and that's part of the reason why you see a lot of farms fail too, is people go into a partnership and then it gets messy from there out. So that's collaborating together, working on those things, and then being able to service more people, more of the restaurants. Like we're shifting, like before I used to go in and I sold whole animals to them. take them to USDA, get them slaughtered, walk in, put the pig on the counter, they wrote me a check and I was on my way. They're so tight on labor now too, that they don't have time to dedicate. I mean, for them, it would take them 8-10 hours to fabricate everything that they were gonna do. They can't spare that labor or dedicate that time anymore. So another subdivision of what we're doing is gonna be continuing that retail market, but also being able to buy from local farms. So say you got 10 pigs over what you can sell for the year, well, we'll take them and then we'll help market it and sell it through that distribution company. So other people that have overages, having access to slaughter and processing, these are all things that we're gonna be working towards and collaborating on.
Yeah, it kind of puts you in a point of almost a little bit of control, almost, you know what I mean? Where, say a farm consistently brings you like subpar animals that have issues and won't pass USDA slaughter. You just can't do that, you know, because our goal is to cut and wrap for roughly 20 farms out of this facility. And then if things work and manage out, it's very duplicable and it's way less expensive than a full USDA shop. So, I mean, we've done all the labor ourselves. We put the buildings up, pretty much all the labor, all the mechanicals, everything is all ours. We've all done it. And by the time the full cut floor and everything is running, we'll have roughly 200,000 in it. So you have a full USDA kill floor, a 40 by 44, 20 seat commercial kitchen, walk-ins, walk-in cooler, walk-in freezer. And we're gonna be able to do, what's the numbers, 17 and.
Depending, like, so with aging
Numbers
beef as opposed to pigs, the two ways that we've mocked it up so far is we're either looking at 8 beef and 10 pigs a week or 7 beef and 17 pigs based on storage and hanging time and things like that. So, but multiply that out over the course of a year. And that also gives us the option of aging up to 21 days, which you're not going to find another slaughterhouse around here that's willing to do that. Like most places, you're lucky now if you can get 10 because they've got so many people beating down the doors to try to get appointments that they're speeding things through. But like, I mean, eventually those numbers, depending on what we can attract for staff and who we can retain, those are all things that we're looking to manipulate and figure out. And it's a dynamic situation that can change from week to week or month to month. But the opportunities are there, and you got to find like-minded people and figure out ways that it works for everybody with boundaries. Boundaries are healthy and good. So that's about us in a nutshell.
Sure, go ahead.
My understanding is that if you do not have USDA inspection in your cut and wraps, you're limited to in-state sales. Is that correct?
Well, even with USDA inspection on the kill floor, we are limited to in-state sales. But the thing is, for us, we're not looking to sell to people in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh. We want to feed our local community. So this is the least friction way to do that. But also the standards are still the same as what you would see in a full USDA facility. Like the cleanliness standards, like the things that we're going to be doing as far as testing and sampling, water testing, it all has to meet those standards, because even though we're going to be a state inspected facility, we still have USDA in 2 to 3 times a year, and then they're going to be there at least once a week when we have slaughter day too. So if they see anything aberrant, you're shut down.
Did you have to provide a special bathroom and everything for the USDA inspector and a special office?
They need a place. They don't even need a full office. They need a place that they can lock up documents that's secure. And if there's a bathroom that's 10 feet away and I just happen to use it once in a while, we're told that we're in pretty good shape. They want to work with us. Like the regional inspector, like when Greg spoke to him, he was very forthcoming and he said, yeah, we need more of these in the area.
They have the inspectors sitting there ready to go. Like
So-
they're not
So the
short-staffed.
sense is that everybody recognizes the need for operations like yours. And the entities the governing entities are willing to work with you guys to make it work. That's what I hear.
I would say that's true.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, if you're gonna collaborate farms, right? So if you're gonna get 4 or 5 farms together to raise protein on one piece of property, right? That's all good and dandy, but if you can't sell it, you have nothing to do with those animals other than feed them. So that is your roadblock right now. And there's a lot of groups around that are talking about trying to fix it, solve problems, do this and do that. But you just gotta do it, you know? I mean, it's what it comes down to. You gotta do it. And we did it for us, Mike's farm, and you know, a handful of other local farms is what we're really pushing for right now. And if it works and it's a profitable model, we can duplicate it. You know, 200,000 is a lot easier to swallow than 2 million. So.
And then just one thing though that you kind of alluded to with USDA processing as opposed to like the level that we're going to be at, the sales from your 20C have to go to end user. Meaning I can't process for East Aurora Co-op and then put it out for resale. If East Aurora Co-op has a license, a 20C license, which I'm sure they do with the value added food, the animals can come in there under USDA inspection, be cut up, packaged and retailed, but that's a whole different entity of something that's probably 3-4 years down the road before we start looking at trying to talk to grocery stores about getting our animals in and things like that. Meat cut, like you used to go to Tops, you used to go to Wegmans. They used to have butchers there that were bringing in sides of beef and cutting it down, breaking it down into steaks and ground and stuff like that. They still have the equipment, but for the most part, they're getting box beef in from Indiana or like IBP, Indiana Package Board. Everything's already, all they have to literally do is take a knife, cut in between the bones, and you've got your steaks that they're repackaging and putting out. So the full USDA, like if it was somebody that wanted to buy from us in order to resell it, that's something we can't do with that licensing.
You guys will go look at that down the road or not?
Never know. I never thought a year ago, if you would have told me I did this, I would have told you you're crazy. But here we are. So.
And I raise about 30 lambs a year for USDA resale. We're going from the lake, Lake Ontario, or down to Sylvester's or out to Wayne County for Joe's. Like I said, slots. It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's full
But are you direct retailing it yourself or are people buying?
Oh, we do farm markets and we're doing some of the restaurants.
You'd still be totally legal under a 20C.
Okay.
So your farmers markets, as long as you're selling it to the end user, you're legal. You can sell it under a 20C to a restaurant because they're considered the end user. They're legal. If you sold your lamb to a grocery store prepackaged like under your 20C and then they're selling it to consumers, not legal.
Is refrigeration or freezing your biggest limiting factor for doing more animals, or is it just
Labor.
Space.
Always labor.
Well, I mean, like the walk-in coolers in the shop itself, there's big enough, like at any given time, the way that we have that planned out is if we do have hiccups or say somebody gets sick, somebody gets hurt and we're not able to process on a given day, we have enough backup room. So with the size of the coolers that we're building and putting in, there is enough room there for 28 beef and almost 80 pigs to be hung at a time.
okay?
But our business model relies on us turning things over so that we can keep everybody moving. And also we're going to be relying heavily on customers to come pick things up on time. So it's like when you drop off, your animal's going to be ready this day. And some of that may change. Like if somebody brings in a beef that's not really finished and doesn't have good cover on it, and we tell them, look, you got about 10 days of aging time based on your carcass quality, like how much fat you have covering before you start hitting significant loss. So they're going to have to get moved up to the front.
There's one other thing just to touch on quick is part of the business model that we've looked at is a tiered membership almost for the shop, right? To have access to the shop. So some of the people that we've talked to coming in the store that have farms that are already approaching us about processing, it's been brought up and they've actually brought it kind of to our attention. It wasn't really on the original scale of things, but the comments are, I would pay extra to get in, right? So we haven't even finalized it yet, but the one thing that we're looking at is like a premier membership thing where it's like $200 a month and we can guarantee you into the shop within 2 weeks. So for the restaurants and the farms that are supplying the restaurants, when the restaurant calls and says, hey, I need half a pig for next week, that guy calls us and says, yeah, bring it, we'll do it Tuesday. You know, now you're still on the same waiting list for even USDA kill. So you don't have that
It
option
used
to
to-
retail that.
USDA access around here used to be significantly better. Like but a lot of those operations through COVID and the pandemic, they realized that they could bring in animals and process them and sell them at retail and make a better margin. So appointments have dropped. Like the one in our region was Heartland Abattoir. They do a phenomenal job. They're great people. Like they're super fun to work with. Like they take care of their customers. But their shifting business model, it cut their appointments over a 2-year period by 2/3 to where they have appointments available for other people. You mentioned Joe's. They huge issues with cancellations for a lot of people. And also even other places like down into Pennsylvania. But then add in like, as a farmer, when you add that into your time and your days, like, I mean, for you to do a round trip run, even just to Sylvester's, like from where you are, you're probably 3.5 hours each way. So you got a whole day shot to drive it down there, drop the animals off, drive home, wait the 5 to 10 days, however long it is before they have it processed. So you got 2 days of just driving. So the opportunity to have something a little closer to home and somebody that's willing to work with you, and with that membership guaranteed access, it may make sense for some people.
Well,
And-
doing that to me, like,
But
that helps.
Once it's USDA, you're,
But customers see Pennsylvania on the sticker going, wait, I thought you're local.
Yeah. And it's also, the other thing with the 20C2 is you can have your own labeling with your farm name on it, your 20C license number, your logo, like there's things that go along with that benefited tiered membership level.
Like there's a question from Anthony on the chat that says, can you describe how the membership of other farmers will work, including how you will do scheduling fees, et cetera?
So so the fees are gonna be pretty much the same across. So we're gonna be slaughtering at like what the current USDA slaughter rates are, which most place on a beef. For slaughter, you're looking between 100 to 125. Most places just getting pigs slaughtered under USDA is anywhere between $60 to $75. I've seen it as high as $100 for pigs in some places, scalded and scraped, which again, another little value added labor thing. But what people would have, they would have that access if they're buying the whole and half animals just in and out slaughtered. The tiered membership, the idea behind that is to have that guaranteed access. And what we would be doing, kind of like how they have a cancellation policy or like places are calling us with cancellations, we would try to build our calendar out as far as we can with our members. But if something happens that they need a faster appointment that we can get them in for, we're gonna hold 1 or 2 appointments a week for a beef and then probably 2 or 3 pigs at a time. And then we have people that are looking to get animals in that are calling all the time. And if our members aren't going to utilize those appointments, then we're going to fill them in with people that maybe are raising 3 pigs a year and that are selling to family members, but still need a butcher.
So you're building some room in there for flexibility.
Any farmer here can verify that you don't need flexibility in your plans on a day-to-day basis. Has anybody got it figured out that well yet? There's got to be flexibility. Anybody else have any other questions? Jim?
Couple actually. Are you just doing pigs and cattle, or are you going to other things like lambs and so on?
Lambs and goats as well. Poultry processing is a whole different set of licensing. That's usually done through the state, and there's several people that do process poultry already, like Herba Verde, which is just local to here. He's got a processing facility. Platodale has one, and then Herm Weber over in Attica has his as well. But yes, we're planning on processing lamb, goat, cattle. I haven't heard anybody call me about alpacas or llamas yet, but it's not out of the realm. exotic species, things like people that are raising antelope or bison and things like that, we don't have plans to do that right now.
The second question, where do you get your feed?
I get mine at Rysdorf right now.
I'm going to Pierce, but we're gonna switch and we're gonna end up grinding our own this year. So we actually have a meeting next Friday, about a little something to kind of change things up for one of the people that we're gonna work with, so.
Is that something, you're looking at contract with farmers for a certain amount of grain, being like Thorpe's with their organic grain or whatever, are you looking to do that?
I think in this year, yeah, by the end of the year, we're gonna have to be at that point. So I have talked to Thorpe's before. I've talked to a couple other people around that are doing more organic, non-GMO. A lot of them don't want soy in it, in the feed. So that's kind of the route that we're gonna look at next Friday, to eliminate feed, the soy and some other stuff. But
It's just hard finding an affordable protein source that you can substitute it.
What about weight? How many cheese makers are in the area?
The thing about whey, there's a few people that are using it, and there's people that have great product that they're feeding their pigs on whey. Like Brian over at Herba Verde, that's like the main staple of his ration. For me, the pigs that I have and the genetics I have, and the application that a lot of my chefs use my pork for, feeding whey doesn't work. So whey just being like your milk byproducts of cheese making and yogurt, multitude of things. If you feed that to pigs consistently, the milk solids soften the fats. So it doesn't cure very well. So if you're trying to make like high value added cured products, when they go to slice that on a slicer where you want this nice white fat, you're gonna have like a red streak going through it because it just tends to run a little bit.
same thing with peanuts. There's a Jordan Green down in Virginia uses peanuts as his bulk protein up until 60 days before they go. And the reason is the peanuts soften the fat up on it, so it's almost like greasy. And they couldn't get it firmed up enough. So the last little bit when they finish them, they pull them off peanuts. But peanuts in Virginia are abundant. I mean, you can buy tractor trailer loads for $4,000 worth, you know. But obviously, $5 a gallon, you're not gonna truck that up here now to pay for it, so. You still gotta have another source at the end game anyways. So,
But eventually we'd like to be able to control the entire process. Like he's got the feed grinder, and since I'm gonna be at the farm 5 days a week at least.
it's on the books this year to get it figured out and sourced. But one project at a time.
I guess I have a comment and a question. My question is, did you work with any USDA programs or New York State programs to help support the project, either through grants or loans?
We've been talking with the Scale Initiative. However, hasn't been any funding that's come in from that yet. They're still doing the survey issues. But a lot of this, well, actually all of it up to this point has just been, Mike, we need somebody to come in and cover tonight, okay, or bad weather.
Yeah, like I worked till 4 o'clock this morning. I got called back into work last night, so it's all overtime, but that all goes back into the project right now. Even the grants that they had just released are only a 20% match.
Yeah.
So if say your kill floor is $100,000, you still gotta come up with that 80. You're gonna get 20 out of it, which is whatever, 20 is 20, but it doesn't cover it, you know, so.
Yeah,
The goal of them spreading the grant money around, I mean, I understand it, it's needed, but it's kind of a drop in the bucket compared to the cost outlay for putting a place together.
yeah, I asked simply because I think it's really important that folks who have some control over the legislation of USDA programs recognize the challenges and obstacles that farmers face in accessing the programs, because I think a lot of them have no clue, especially the smaller farmers tend to be less vocal. They obviously don't have lobbyists working for them like larger farms, so.
Well, we're too busy working our day jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
The thing is timing, it's time.
Your
right?
grants are the overtime that you get paid from the weather gets back.
Yeah. Checks in the mail.
Yeah.
But
And then
the reality of it is, it's time.
yeah,
If I gotta wait a year and a half for that $20,000 to come in to fund my project.
Yeah, and if it's reimbursement based,
Yeah.
you're already fronting capital anyway.
Yeah, how many other farms are gonna close in that time?
Mhm.
There's guys that have called us about scheduling for processing, saying that if we don't get them in this year, that they're done, they're closing. And we're talking 20, 25 cows. It's not a lot,
But it is.
but it is, like,
Yeah.
that's what his income revolves on.
Yeah.
And, I mean, what do you tell that guy? Say, yeah, we're gonna do everything we can, but I can't guarantee it, you know?
With that, and the fact that you've already built it, scalable infrastructure, do you already have it set in your business plan of how you're gonna expand on it? Is it other places to keep-
We're really just hyper focused right now on getting plant one up and running. But also, like, I mean, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of people out there that have the skill set to jump right in. Like, it's something where, I mean, I've been puttering around and learning with this stuff at home for the past 3 years. And it's at the point that I can do it with some efficiency. Like, taking people that don't have that background and teaching them, cultivating, seeing that they, like, the biggest resource that we're gonna need is not going to be farmers to bring us animals to do. It's gonna be employees who we can recruit, train, retain, so that we're not constantly retraining people every 3 months. Like, it's hard work, and there's days where it really sucks. It's like farming in general, like, in 2 days when we're outside and we're knee deep in mud and you're wearing waders instead of boots. Like, it's one of those days where, it's one of those things where I think we have to crawl before we try to run. And trying to take it like a hockey stick and just have 5 facilities open where we're not actually doing the work and really seeing it is not something that we're ready for yet. If we get enough people that we can train and recruit them and retain them, then yes, that's gonna be down the line expansion. Because for the same money somebody spent on a $2 million USDA facility, if we can build 6 of these, like, I mean, we were very fortunate. Greg already had some buildings, but also doing the labor himself and, like, me helping when I can. Like, otherwise this probably would have been a $400,000 build out.
Yeah, it's incredible that you did it 200K. That's, yeah, I can't even remember. my
In,
number.
in a year, and well, in less than a year. We started the store last October. We finished it in July, and then we started the butcher shop right after that. So this has just started in July. So we'll be running hopefully within a month. So,
Yeah, my other comment is just, my partner works in renewable energy and their big thing is solar grazing. People really think that solar grazing is gonna take off. And I have a lot of issues with renewable development anyway. And I'm like, where are you gonna process all these animals? And they, I asked my partner this, he pulled up a list of processing facilities and I'm like, that means nothing. Like you said, how are they staffed? What appointments are they actually keeping? How are we going to continue to add animals into the system but this seems like something where even if it's not you replicating it, you've created a model where other people can replicate it to handle these animals.
yeah,
But-
and that's part of like what that Western New York scale program is looking at. Once we're up and running, we've already given Anthony quite a bit of information about it, but it's a duplicable model, right? And it makes it, from a producer side, to have access to that on your own place, even like Mike coming there, it makes my life 100 times easier because I don't have to get that pig bred by this date or I miss it 30 days at the end. You know what I mean? Where when they're ready, they're ready. I'll literally open the fence and we'll walk them out of the woods and that's it, but.
And that's a good point that we didn't make yet. People are booking, slaughter facilities and processing are so far booked out right now. People are booking appointments on animals that, yeah, like, there's literally, like, you have like 4-month-old piglets that you would have to book appointments for their progeny a year and a half down the line in some places to get them done. So, I mean,
When you try to schedule out 18 months,
especially,
Especially pigs that are a little smaller, a little big, you try to get, there's no flexibility, and I'd like to give these another month, or I want them in a little bit sooner because they're getting too big, but how do you plan out exactly how a litter of piglets is gonna grow a year and a half or 2 years out? And it's never,
well,
they're never perfect every time.
no, but with that model, so say they're a little light, right? Say, oh, yeah, we could swap some stuff around, we'll give you another month. Hey, they're ready now, let's get them in.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I need another month, you know?
Yeah, I
gives
know
us
with
that-
the current stuff now, there's no, if you don't take that appointment
Yeah,
that you have, you're sunk for a year probably.
Yeah.
So you're stuck.
And then if that butcher can't fill that appointment on short notice, you're the guy that you remember the last time he canceled on us like a day before with 3 animals, you're out.
yeah, you send that animal either light and you're not gonna make any money on it, or you're gonna send it heavy and you're losing money on it, feeding it longer than what, you know.
Once you hit
You're-
that diminishing return point.
I have another question, and it's not related exactly to animal and slaughter, but in our discussion earlier, Greg, you mentioned that you have some land available that somebody could grow vegetables or produce in, or other crops. And given that I'm asking about collaborations that involve multiple enterprises, what is the likelihood that you could also collaborate with another farmer who wants to add to your enterprise on the same land?
Yeah, I mean, like, kind of like what we were talking about, you know, we acquired the lease on our farm by knocking on a door. Like, I went and knocked on her door and said, hey, we're the new neighbors, we just moved in. I kind of knew her anyways from the Snowmobile Club, doing some trail work. And we got to know her a little bit, and she's like, hey, I'm looking for somebody to rent it, to try and plow it up, you know, do the fields and everything, just to keep it from going so far past production. And I said, well, give me a few days. It wasn't even on my radar. And within a week, we had a lease on it. We had a 10-year lease, and now we're working towards a lifetime. So, land access, I hear it all the time. I'm in a lot of meetings. Everybody's land access, land access. Not a single person has knocked on my door and said, hey, can I rent an acre from you? Sure. There's a dead end road. There's a road to get back to the field. You got access to water. All you gotta do is knock most of the time. You know what I mean? Like, get out and know the people that are doing it. And if somebody wanted to farm an acre of vegetables on mine, I'd give them access to the water system, and yes, whatever, throw me a share at the end of the year and we'll call it even, you know. It's land that I'm not using, but it's actually a cost right now because I have to maintain, you know, I'm still maintaining it, still paying to lease it, you know, whether it's brush hog or whatever. Now diesel's $5 a gallon, so it's a bigger expense right now. So, but even if you got, you know, they tried to do this through Legacy Farm. It's a farm that's down in Franklinville. You know, the guy bought the property and they're trying to sublease it out and stuff like that. But logistically, that model to me doesn't work. It's too far. You know, I mean, you're an hour and 10 minutes from the city to go out there, farm, and then come back. Like, yeah, he has access to the markets and stuff, but your bottom line is not there. There's too much going on there, you know, infrastructure wise. But that's my thought on it. You know, yeah, it's a good model. It works. I think Providence Creek is doing something kind of similar to that.
Well, thanks for listening to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So, hi, everybody. My name is Andrew. I direct a program based in the city of Buffalo called Cooperation Buffalo. We're a nonprofit organization that just got started a couple of years ago, aiming to increase the number of cooperatives and particularly worker-owned cooperative businesses in our region. I'll talk a little bit more about what those are and what that means in a minute. But first, big caveat. A really wonderful first presentation. I'm really glad to hear from both of the guys about the real work that they're doing and the fact that they're just doing it. And I know that a lot of you in the room and Zoom here have lived experience and probably a lot of experience, particularly in the agricultural field, with producer cooperatives, which is something I'll mention but not really focus on. My background, I have direct experience working and being a part of cooperatives more in the urban setting. So housing cooperatives where a group of people co-own real estate together. and also worker cooperatives. Some of our founders at Cooperation Buffalo were a couple of the fantastic women who started Bread Hive, which was started out as a wholesale bakery and moved into direct retail and cafe space a few years ago on the west side of Buffalo. And one of our founders also was the first executive director of the Fruit Belt Community Land Trust, so another model where land is being co-owned. And I know when we hear from Ian a little later, he's going to talk more about those models of land stewardship. So we're a business technical assistance and lending group. We also offer capital to businesses that are starting out in the cooperative space here in our region. So I'm just going to click through a little bit of slide material to let you know a little bit more about who we are, what we do, and talk a little bit about the co-op model. And then I'll stop screen sharing and you can see my giant face maybe on the screen. And if there's any questions, we can just talk about it. All right. So as I mentioned, Cooperation Buffalo is a nonprofit organization that is seeking to increase community wealth building opportunities for folks and increase the number of democratically controlled and owned firms in our region. And that can look very different because there's many different types of cooperatives. A couple of the ways we do that, we engage our community in training and a lot of education, just talking about this model of cooperative economics and cooperative ownership. When you go to the traditional small business services folks in our region, they often don't even mention that this is a way you can set up a business entity. Before this, I worked for about 6 years in our Buffalo office of the Small Business Development Center. So I was part of that SBA team that helped people write business plans and coach them through applying for loans through some of the local commercial lenders and CDFIs, community development financial institutions. And one of the starkest things I remember from that experience was just that, partnerships are often not seen as a good thing, and certainly co-ops are seen as even, a less viable way to structure something. And to Michael's great point earlier, boundaries are so key. These things do work, but they need structure to them. And when they don't have structure, it can often go off the rails. We also directly incubate businesses. So we run a program every year called our Cooperative Academy, which is a business boot camp that teaches the basics of starting a business, but also then teaches the basics of operating a business in a cooperative manner. And some of the graduates from that program go on to work with us directly for 6 months, a year, however long it takes to actually get their business up and running. And then we also offer additional technical assistance to other co-op and community-owned projects in the area when we're able to, depending on our capacity. We're a staff of 3 people right now. It's like 2.5 full-time equivalents right now. So because we go deep with our co-ops, we're working with about 12 to 15 different projects in various stages of development right now, and we're pretty maxed out. We would have to expand our capacity to take on new projects, which is an exciting place to be in a region that historically has not had a lot of cooperative businesses. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we're members of a national loan fund, a CDFI, that circulates capital to cooperative businesses in what they call a non-extractive way, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. All right, so this is a little bit about how we decide what projects to work with. We try to keep ourselves adhering to our values and principles as an organization. So we specifically look to work with projects that are shifting economic control to communities, democratizing wealth in the workplace, advancing ecological restoration, driving racial justice and social equity, relocalizing most production and consumption where possible, and retaining and restoring cultures and traditions. These values come from a framework called the Just Transition Framework, which is developed by some really awesome folks in the San Francisco Bay Area called Movement Generation. And we use those same principles to guide our work as well. Here's a little bit more about the lending that we're able to offer through the national CDFI called Seed Commons. Seed Commons refers to its lending products as non-extractive, which can mean different things depending on who you're talking to. But for us, it means that repayments are actually flexible. So it's only when a cooperative that we work with has reached a point of profitability where they start sharing some of that profit back to the loan fund. So the terms and the actual dollars of those repayments are going to vary depending on the health of the business. So that means a lot of the co-ops that we worked with during COVID, especially when the business shutdowns happened in mid-2020, got to stop paying their loans back for a little while. And they weren't expected to still pay monthly installments. There's also no personal guarantees or credit scores that we're looking for when we're vetting cooperative projects. The quote security that we look for, like a traditional lender would, to reduce their risk for the loan that's being offered, is really based on the close relationship that we have with the cooperatives that we're incubating. So we're along for the whole ride. We will be working with the business pretty actively until they're fully repaid on their loan, reviewing financial statements, helping them to get better at pivoting as everything always changes, and you got to get good at being flexible as a small business owner, and making sure that they're getting better at standing on their own. A lot of the folks we work with who are starting worker-owned cooperative businesses are, in many cases, owning a business for the first time in their life. They didn't see themselves as folks who could own a business because they didn't have the capital to start one right out of the gate. And so a lot of what we do is making sure that folks feel confident sustaining what they're doing over the long term and have the skills and the resources and the relationships, which is often the most key thing that they need. So that's a little bit about what we do. I want to present cooperative business models as one thing for y'all to chew on when you're having extended conversation today around what different models of collaboration might look like in your field, right? Knowing full well that I'm not an expert in your field and you are, and there's a really important need to meet folks and meet each other where you're at. And so some of these things might generate some interesting opportunities for shared projects. Maybe they won't quite yet, but Ignacio wanted me to present cooperatives specifically as one tool in the tool shed when you're thinking about collaboration. So what are cooperatives? A cooperative at its most basic sense is an entity that's designed to meet the common economic, social, and cultural needs of its members. Members of cooperatives can be different groups of people or businesses. So again, in agriculture and in rural environments, the most common cooperatives that we'll see are producer cooperatives or agricultural cooperatives of a group of farms or farmers that are coming together to either share equipment, back office support, sometimes marketing, right? You think about, there's some really large examples, right? Like Ocean Spray is a cooperative. And then regionally here, obviously, we've got Upstate Niagara Cooperative. There are many other different types of cooperatives where the members are different groups of people. So the one that we focus on the most in our work are worker cooperatives. So I'm going to come back to that example quite frequently, where the employees of a business have the opportunity to co-own the business together. There's also consumer cooperatives. Grocery co-ops are the most common in this sector, right? We have Lexington Co-op, the East Aurora Food Co-op, obviously, where you all are right now. And African Heritage Food Co-op, which was recently started in the city of Buffalo. Credit unions are also a form of cooperative. That's a group of folks pooling their financial resources together to lend to each other and provide a community-owned and managed financial institution that doesn't have shareholders that are sifting profits off the top of it routinely. Anytime a credit union has a good year, that ends up usually being reduced fees or new services for the members. Producer cooperatives, like I mentioned, which can be agricultural, but they can also be things like a producer cooperative of a group of artists who come together to co-own a gallery space or a production facility. Housing cooperatives, like I mentioned, where folks own real estate together to live in, typically. And then there's this thing called multi-stakeholder co-ops, where you can actually have a combination of multiple of these other forms, right? So there are some grocery co-ops in other parts of the country where they're consumer co-ops, right? They're owned by the customers. But there's also a class of worker owners at the same time. So the workers have some control over their workplace, some ability to profit from the labor that they're putting in good years, and representation on the co-op's board, right? So they have some real decision-making power. Most cooperatives internationally follow the same 7 principles. I'm not going to read them all off here, but the key thing here is autonomy, democracy, ongoing education for its members. And this comes back to the point that our first presenters are making around, you can't just throw people into roles and expect them to thrive, right? There has to be ongoing conversation around what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what structures we're putting in place to make it successful. If folks don't know how to engage the decision-making process of their co-op, they're not really able to participate in it. So even just education around remembering what our policies and structures and boundaries are that we have in place can be really key to a healthy cooperative environment. And then my favorite principle that I always like to highlight here is principle 6 there, cooperation among cooperatives. There's a mandate for cooperatives to be forming an ecosystem and an economy together. So there's obvious and really beneficial relationships that are formed when people are always going to help out each other when they're in the co-op community, or at least they should be. Some examples of local cooperatives, and this is something that I already touched on a little bit. A couple examples of producer co-ops would be the Upstate Niagara, farm cooperatives, the Farmer Pirates Cooperative, which was started several years ago as a group of urban farmers in the city of Buffalo. Consumer cooperatives, things like Lexington, the East Aurora Food Co-op, African Heritage Food Co-op, Urban Roots Cooperative Garden Market in the city of Buffalo, which when they started were the one and only, I think, gardening store that was cooperatively owned by the customers. I think there's also a consumer co-op, food co-op trying to get started in Williamsville right now. Some examples of worker cooperatives. So this is where the employees co-own the business. Obviously, Bread Hive Bakery, which I mentioned before. The Rose Garden, which is a childhood center that we helped convert to worker ownership. The founding owner of this business was getting up to retirement age, but wanted her business to stick around and wanted the services that she provided to still be in the community. And so she decided to sell the business to the teachers of the childcare center. And so now they co-own and operate the childcare center together. Grow Operative or Grow Op, which is indoor aquaponic vertical farm in the city. Western New York Technology Collaborative, which does IT and web development work. And then Arts Cafe down in Springville is a new worker-owned business that also has a community-owned real estate component that I won't get into now because it's a little complicated, but it's a really exciting model. That's not all of them, but that's a sampling for you. So worker cooperatives, the type of co-ops that we focus on mostly in our work with folks are businesses that are owned and controlled by their workers, like I said, on the basis of one worker, one vote. They can often provide stability and wealth creation for traditionally low-wage workers or workers that don't have a lot of opportunity to skill up or to increase the income that they're making in certain industries. And workers that create the profits get to decide for themselves what they're going to do with them. And they can be formed both as startups or like conversions, like I mentioned with the childcare center. Here's just a little visual to kind of show where worker co-ops fit in a couple different areas here. So worker co-ops are one type of cooperative, just like the consumer co-ops, producer co-ops, housing co-ops, et cetera. Worker co-op is also one model of employee ownership. You might hear of some other types of ways for employees to become part owners in businesses. One of them is the employee stock ownership plan, or ESOP. And there's a lot of construction businesses locally that will be structured like this sometimes, and many more across the country, where workers own shares in a company that entitle them to a share once they retire, get to retirement age, they can cash out and have something extra. Doesn't necessarily come with the ability to also democratically make decisions about how the business operates or its long-term goals. And that's something that democracy is a little bit more unique to the worker co-op model. So why co-ops? I'm not going to try to sell you on it too hard, but I want to tell you some of the reasons why people do it. And obviously there's challenges and reasons not to use this model at the same time. So here's a few highlights of why folks have turned to this model, both in our region, but also across the country. There's certainly a resurgence of cooperative businesses happening right now over the past 10 years or so across the US. Often worker co-ops are going to provide better pay and benefits than traditional business setups. An opportunity to co-own an asset can be really valuable for an employee. It also gives workers some voice in some decisions. There's going to be clear structures and delineated decision-making responsibilities in a co-op. So depending on how it's set up, folks will have more or less ability to make decisions about how the work gets done. For the business, a lot of studies show that employee ownership produces higher productivity, more growth opportunities, lower turnover, which is key. Folks are like actually invested in the business as co-owners, and so they're more likely to stick around. And definitely improved business longevity, right? If there's multiple owners, the chance of all of those owners deciding to close down at the same time, or all of them deciding to move their business to another state, really doesn't happen, right? You'll have people come in and out of the ownership of the cooperative, but the cooperative is going to stay rooted in the community. And then there's obviously some things that it can do for the community at large too, like keeping a business, like keeping a community institution rooted in place. Co-ops can provide more sustainable long-term employment. If a company runs into economic distress, co-ops are generally more adept at preserving jobs while planning longer-term adjustments to the firm's operations, whereas traditional businesses might just be looking for, okay, I need to cash out right now and shut this whole thing down. Co-ops can often be more stable. Employee-owned businesses have also been shown to attract talent and have above average retention rates too. Economic crisis is one of those things that often leads to a spike in particularly worker-owned businesses, but also cooperatively owned businesses as a whole. So here's just a sampling of examples in more recent history. There's an entire region in Spain that turned to employee-owned firms in the 1950s, and that region is almost entirely worker-owned businesses to this day. Which is really remarkable. And many of them are large multinational companies, not just small micro businesses. In the early 2000s, during economic upheaval in Argentina, a lot of manufacturing businesses were closing down. Capital was running away from the region, and they were just, closing up the shops that they operated. And workers actually stepped in and reclaimed those businesses and said, hey, I need these jobs. Our community still needs the stuff that we're producing here. And so we're just going to take over these factories to, a little bit like an illegal farmer's market, if you will. And then also more recently, the 2008 recession, and certainly the economic crisis that has been the pandemic, has also led to folks turning toward forming businesses that are co-owned by community members to meet community needs that are lacking right now. And here's a little bit about during COVID specifically, we saw that a lot of worker-owned businesses in our national network weren't laying people off or closing down at the same rates as traditionally structured businesses. A lot of that had to do with the fact that it's co-owned by the employees and everybody needs to put food on the table, right? So rather than lay each other off, a lot of workers at these companies are actually sitting down and discussing like, okay, what do we really need to get by right now? Can we reduce some of our hours so that we can get through and still have our business and still have these jobs in the future, which is really inspiring. So just a couple more slides here about how co-ops form. And this is a lot of what we can help a project with too, if there is one emerging. So most obvious way is to start something up from scratch, right? So like any other business, a co-op startup begins with an idea to create a business that's going to meet a need in the community or meet a market opportunity, right? Cooperative startups still need to follow all the same legal and tax regulations, still have to incorporate, still have to create a business plan, still have to find capital, get your licenses, that sort of thing. For co-ops, this process is undertaken by a team of entrepreneurs who intend to be equal owners of the business, with a one-person, one-vote decision-making structure, and they're usually going to commit to the 7 cooperative principles or some other sort of guiding framework for how they're going to work together. And legally, co-ops can be incorporated in a whole variety of ways in New York State. There's a lot of LLC models where the operating agreement is just structured in a manner in which the democratic decision-making is enshrined. There's also a cooperative corporation statute that we have in New York State that's already sort of tailored to this model, which is really helpful. I mentioned the conversion model of forming a cooperative earlier. That's where an existing business that has existing customers, an existing market, existing workforce, transitions to cooperative ownership. And sometimes this happens as a succession plan, right? When someone's looking to get out of their line of work and they're like, okay, I'm not finding any single buyers of this business that are gonna like keep it running the way I want it to, but maybe the folks who I employ are actually invested in keeping this thing going. Also, sometimes a single owner decides they don't want to be the only person up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. worrying about the business or fixing that leak that sprung up, and they'd rather share the burden with others. And so they'll stay on at the co-op, but open up ownership to everybody else. And that owner obviously gets a payout during that transition for the sweat equity and the value of the business that they've built up until that point. So essentially the new co-op buys the business from the initial owner. But in some cases, the initial owner stays on and becomes part of a team because they don't want to do it by themselves anymore. We're supporting a business in Clarence right now, and also a tree care and tree removal business in the city that is following that kind of model, where the owner is still young, still wants to work, but doesn't want to be the only one shouldering it anymore. Yeah, and like I said, the selling owner can either leave the business or stay on as one of the new worker owners, and some or all of the workers can be the initial worker owners of the new cooperative. It is a misnomer that everybody in a cooperative is a co-owner. Oftentimes in cooperatives, there's still an opportunity to have typical employees. If there are folks who are really key to the team, who really just want to clock in and clock out and not think about it the rest of their day or the rest of their week. But it's important, if you're going to pursue this model, to have a core group of folks that see themselves as entrepreneurs or co-entrepreneurs, because you need that entrepreneur spirit to make something successful. And then you can decide if you still want to have some part-time or other employees that are not owners, that don't have that same decision-making and profit-sharing benefit, but are still helping to get the work done. So I threw a couple of questions up here because I know you're going to have a discussion about collaborative options and ways you may want to work together a little bit later in the program. So some of the questions that I always ask folks when they're coming to us with a cooperative idea, when it's a startup, what resources do you need? Are there other folks also invested in this idea? And can I achieve the scale that I want better by working with others? Or is it more important to figure out my thing first and think about collaboration with other entities second? Because that can be true too. In the conversion space, are there community institutions, businesses that are at risk of closure that we want to help to preserve? And are there workers who want to preserve their jobs and become co-owners? If workers aren't invested in the idea of a business transitioning to cooperative structure, it's not going to work. So it takes the right people for sure. And then second tier co-ops, so these would be things like producer cooperatives or shared services cooperatives, where it's a cooperative of other businesses, right? Or of producers that are coming together to share resources or to do something at scale. So what shared needs do I and other producers have, and can we benefit from pooling resources together? And then do we need shared marketing, shared equipment, shared operations? What are the things that are going to help us do what we want to do together? You don't have to do it all. You know, you could say, you know what, we just need a shared brand and marketing, structure for each other, or we need a facility or some equipment that we want to be sharing in a certain way. And then you can think about structuring it. Is one person going to own it and lease it to other people, or are we going to try a cooperative model where we all form an entity together that goes and seeks the capital needed to buy the equipment, and then we have very clear structures as to how we're going to co-manage this entity that we've created together and make decisions about usage and fees and things that we'd be paying in. So those are, I think, some of the core questions to ask when you're thinking about forming up some cooperative entities. And I'm certainly going to stick around for the rest of the day, so I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about this model, some of the things I've seen work and not work in our experience with some of the urban cooperatives that we've worked with that are more in this worker-owned or consumer-owned kind of model. And yeah, I'm excited to hear from you all about your experiences too. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right. So I can certainly take questions or comments that folks have at this point. And yeah, it's great to be with you all this morning. And I so wish I could see everybody there in person. I don't like not seeing my audience.
Can you please share your email and contact information on the chat, please?
Yes, I absolutely will.
Thank you.
The other challenges that have been seen, that you've seen, other than boundaries? No, we know that one. What other kinds of things?
I think I missed the beginning of your question, Kathleen, but I think you're asking about other challenges that come up in this kind of model, right?
Other than we've heard it, so we've heard boundaries, very, very important. What other kinds of challenges can come up, and what can we do to shortcut them or prevent and overcome them?
I mean, this is true in the small business world everywhere, right? But one of the biggest challenges to this kind of model specifically is the ability to find capital for it, right? So most traditional lenders, commercial lenders like your M&T Bank and Key Bank and folks like that get really squeamish at the cooperative idea because they want one person who's got a lot of money to personally guarantee whatever money is being borrowed, right? And so that's why it's really wonderful that there are some capital providers out there who can do lending for cooperatives that don't involve some of these more traditional measures, right? So there's several national co-op lenders. The Seed Commons that we're part of is one of them. And so I think we're addressing the issue that it is hard to raise capital for these kind of businesses, but it's always true that just, we need to shake the trees and have more accessible money for folks to start the things that their communities need, right? So that's always a big one. The boundaries thing, I'll come back to it again because it's been brought up a couple times, but like, and Michael said this earlier too, right? Like, have your exit strategy written down on paper already. What happens if we dissolve this cooperative? What happens if someone is not working out as part of the team? Have all of those policies and procedures mapped out in your bylaws, mapped out in policy that you've all agreed to, mapped out in your membership agreement, which is a document that folks typically sign when they join a cooperative, so that when stress happens, you just have to follow the thing on the page and you don't have to get so wrapped up in the emotion of an unfortunate experience, right? So definitely having those things mapped out ahead of time. And I think one of the other biggest hurdles, which is part of what we're trying to do, or part of what we're trying to provide at Cooperation Buffalo, is just the sort of lack of education and training in these models. Our culture here in the US and in the Western world is very individualistic, right? I'm going to do my thing. And that has a lot of benefits, right? And there's a reason why that has proliferated and worked for a lot of folks. But learning how to work together in teams can be a really challenging thing. We're not taught that in school. We're not taught that in business school all the time. And so just kind of beefing up your muscles of like, okay, how do we vote on something when there's some disagreement at the table, and how do we work through disagreements that happen, and how do we lean into the fact that we're really here doing this together as a group, not because we think we're better than each other or our ideas are better than each other, but because we actually think the idea that the group comes up with as a whole, once we incorporate everybody's different perspectives, is going to be stronger than anything that each of us could have come up with individually. And so we do a lot of work just in that collaboration, teamwork, consensus building kind of space. And believe it or not, a lot of the co-ops that we work with actually strive for consensus in their decision making. So they take a little bit longer to make a decision, but they bring everybody along, which ends up making it more agreeable to folks than just if you're lobbying to get 51% of the vote and don't worry about that other 49%, they'll just have to come along instead. But that takes skill, to get better at. So those are some of the things. I think building up those skills in shared decision making, access to capital, and certainly having your structure very clear from the get-go, and your structure for how to change the structure in the model if you guys find it's not working. What's our voting threshold for changing our bylaws, and we need to do that, or dissolving the co-op and doing something different if this model wasn't working for us. Other questions?
I have a question, Andrew, and it's related to what you're talking in terms of boundaries and it's the question of trust. And it seems to me that you talk about a culture of individualism, which basically says, in a way, that we cannot trust each other to work together. And so I'm thinking. So the question I have is, you're saying that the work that you do in education about how worker cooperatives operate is one of learning a new language and a new understanding of what kind of trust is required to build this kind of business.
There's a lot there. I'll say this, like, trust is built through experience, right? Oftentimes. So knowing what you're trusting each other to do is really key. So that comes back to developing really clear structures. One of the things that cooperatives do right from the get-go in your membership agreement, in the bylaws or the operating agreement of your company, is you spell out the rights and the responsibilities of a member of the co-op. And so it's very clear, these are the things we are trusting each other to do and participate in. If folks are not doing those things, that's when you got to call folks in and say, hey, you're not fulfilling your membership contract in this cooperative. And so we either need to see some improvement or we need to part ways, right? One of the simplest tools that a lot of co-ops that I've seen use, and this works at small co-ops where it's 3-4 people, but also really large co-ops, Equal Exchange, which retails coffee and chocolates, right, is a pretty large worker cooperative. They've got over 100 worker owners at the business across it. And they also work with producer co-ops who provide the coffee beans and things like that for them in Central and South America and other places. But they use this tool that I've adapted a few times with folks, which is, it's actually just a chart that you draw up that clearly delineates who makes what decision. Does our board make decisions around salary and wages, or do the workers all vote on that together? What decisions do our managers in management positions make? What decisions do our floor workers make, right? And actually just having a chart that everybody has a copy of, so it's very clear and who does what and who has what authority to make what decisions in what spaces. And that level of clarity, even in a traditional business that has a really strong hierarchy where your boss is in control of your job, sometimes it isn't clear in those situations what decisions you get to make versus your boss gets to make. So it's a great tool for anybody to use, I think. But in co-ops, it's I think really helpful because it shows, these are the boundaries of my role, these are the boundaries of somebody else's role. And one other thing I'll say about this is cooperatives don't mean necessarily that it's a collective, democratic, everybody makes every decision thing, right? Like, everybody doesn't get together and decide what color the business cards are going to be. There is very often a lot of hierarchy of responsibilities and roles and delegations in cooperative businesses. There's a lot of cooperative restaurants and cafes, for instance. And when you've got the dinner rush going on, you still need hierarchy in the kitchen at a restaurant and in your front office, or your front of house folks as well, right? And so adhering to those roles and having clear understanding of who does what in what scenario is still really key at these businesses, just like everybody else. There are some models of cooperatives that can work in certain situations where it's very collectivized and horizontal and everybody has input on everything. But to run most businesses and to compete with the traditional businesses out there in the market, you still have to operate like one a lot of the time. The difference is those workers have final say over what happens with the profits. If they don't like their manager, they can vote them out, right? So there's more control over the workplace in general, but not necessarily on like day-to-day decision making. Anyway, that was a ramble, but I hope that answered some of your questions, Ignacio.
Can you talk a little bit about time frame? Like, how long, what average, full range, longest you've ever seen? How long would it take to get something up and running?
It is not so different from starting any other kind of business. It really depends on what folks bring to the table at first. Sometimes someone's just got an idea in themselves, right? But they know they want to form a cooperative with other folks. So the first thing I'll tell them is, great, now go find some initial teammates who want to do the same thing that you want to do, right? But sometimes you've got a team of folks that are all thinking the same. They've all put some thought into a business idea already. And it's really as simple as whipping up a business plan, a financial model, figuring out what you're going to do in when your business model doesn't work. So having some of your pivots ready to go. And trying to go get capitalized, whether that's, everybody's going to pitch in some of their own money to start the business, or you're going to try to leverage a loan from somewhere, or try to raise some investment capital, right? So it's all the same thing that a normal group would require to get something started. And so then it really depends on what the business is, what the industry is, how complicated it is, to get the money and to start the particular thing. On the side of the equation where we're talking about converting existing businesses, I've seen that take as little as 6 months. You know, if an owner is really ready to head out the door and very motivated to get their workers to purchase this business from them. And actually I've seen it take as long as like 5 to 10 years, because sometimes we'll start the concept of, we want this to turn into an employee-owned firm when the owner retires, and the owner starts taking some steps years before they retire to bring in a general manager, phase themselves out slowly, start to build some participatory culture among the workers by giving them some decisions that they can already make to sort of shift the company culture over time rather than doing it all at once. And sometimes what I see in these conversions also is you convert the business, it suddenly becomes a cooperative, and some of the employees self-select. Some folks find this isn't the kind of thing I want to do. You know, I do just want to clock in and clock out and work for somebody else. And so there will be some turnover during that transition as well, where you're letting people go who are not ready for this new transition, and bringing folks in who do want to co-own something, right? So sometimes there's a little bit of shifting that takes place in those models.
Thank you, Andrew, very, very much. And I'm really glad you can stick around.
Yes, I'll
Great.
be here. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for having me here. And yeah, unfortunate that I have to just zoom in, but grateful to take part in this way, and grateful to connect in this limited virtual way. But so I'm Mcsweeny. I'm the director of Agrarian Trust. Agrarian Trust is a national nonprofit land trust that's working to innovate how land trusts work. And I'll describe that through a presentation today. But really it's looking to utilize existing models that conservation land trusts use, community land trusts use, and to some extent cooperatives use to form nonprofit land holding structures that are local to community. So I'll go through this work of Agrarian Trust in creating these Agrarian Commons. I'll move through fairly quick on these slides, but this is being recorded, so you'll have this information. And really, I want to be sure to have some time for questions and some dialogue back and forth. So, please look on our website for more information. Please reach out if you have questions and want to talk further. Please take a look at the slides on the recorded version to learn more. But all of what I'm sharing with you is in pieces shared on our website. So, there's a robust amount of information there, including a number of guidebooks and toolkits that describe our work and the Agrarian Commons model. So I'd encourage everyone who has an interest to dig deeper into the work. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm Mcsweeny. I live in southern New Hampshire, have a small farm with my wife and I. We lease out the farm to a certified natural vegetable grower. We benefit by being surrounded by farm. They benefit by secure land tenure. We've conserved our land with NRCS. I manage forest land as a certified tree farm, and we've kind of do work around perennial tree and cane fruit just for homestead use, but kind of involved in agriculture in many different ways. Prior to Agrarian Trust, I ran a private foundation that focused on supporting land trust work, primarily farmland protection, farmland transfer, lease, tenure arrangements. And that work was in New England, and now Agrarian Trust is across the country. So Agrarian Trust really was founded on three kind of priority areas. One, to raise the issue of the land that's in transition. We're at a point in history where farmland, up to 70% of the farmland in this country, upwards of 400 million acres, is in transition this decade and next. And so, who is going to own that? Who is going to have access and tenure to that? Who is going to have equity in that is a big question. And what is that going to be used for is central to how we feed ourselves, how we steward the landscape, and so much more. Second area Agrarian Trust focuses on is supporting stakeholders. That's kind of other aligned organizations, helping to build networks, helping to be part of networks that are focused on land. And finally, our third area of mission work is to develop a community commons structure that I'll talk to you about today. So, this here is an example of our initiatives, Agrarian Commons, that also focus on faith lands, where we engage faith communities who struggle with similar demographics and the need to plan for a future of land they hold, and at the same time hold ownership of considerable amounts of land across this country. And then agrarian legal support, much of this requires legal knowledge and capacity that's localized to states where people are. So building a network of attorneys who understand and can support this work and are trying to innovate this work with us and with others is really important. And then this Our Land Symposium is a national conference where we have to really raise awareness for what I'm describing to you now. So, we understand that, the United States as it sits was really founded on agriculture in many ways. And there's a history there of how agriculture was used to extract and exploit people and perpetuate genocide that needs to be recognized. And at the same time, like where we are, we have a land base that is still considerably in agriculture, but it looks quite different than the way this country was founded on agriculture. And some of that is the realities of demographics, as I touched upon. The age of owners, farmland owners are aging, and that means that farmland will be in transition and already is in transition, where according to USDA, 37 mid-sized farms in this country close for good every single day from 2012 forward. So, as with many business sectors, the middle is being lost, and the middle is what sustains community, provides viable livelihoods and careers, allows people to connect with and have those opportunities in community. So, mid-sized farms are being lost at an alarming rate. Farmland is being kind of moved out of agriculture and farmland ownership at alarming rates. Farmland values are increasing significantly. So year over year, for the past 30 years, farmland values continue to increase. And generally, regionally and nationally, year over year, farm incomes have decreased during that time. So, affording farmland was difficult a generation ago. It's near impossible in parts of the country now. So, all of this and more, we're really at a crisis point in agriculture for a number of reasons. And I won't read this to you, but I touched on some of these already, and others are equally alarming, that we're at a crisis, and we don't talk about it a lot. We don't talk about land reform in the way some other countries do. We don't talk about, and we don't put in place the systems needed to support mid-sized farms that are focused on food production and owned in community in the way we need to. So really, how are we going to address this crisis? We feel that there's a place for land trusts to work and address this crisis. So we, inspired by the work of existing kind of organizations and movements that have developed over time, and inspired by kind of work elsewhere, some more recently over the last 2 decades in Europe, that's developed community-centered farmland owning structures that started in France, is now in over 18 countries in Europe, of owning farmland in community-centered structures. We feel there's examples out there, and we feel there's structures that, if simply evolved and focused on agriculture, can really address this problem. So we, Agrarian Trust, holding these principles as an organization, came together and we created this Agrarian Commons structure. And this is what I'll spend a little bit of time on in presentation today. So the Agrarian Commons structure is a nonprofit community land trust structure that is embedded in community. And by that, I mean the majority of the board is local to the community it works in. The title ownership of property held in this model is held in the local Agrarian Commons board. The decision-making around priorities, lease agreements, lease relationships is held at the local Commons board level. And yet the local Commons board is also connected to and supported by us, the National Trust. That we feel there's benefits of a national organization and there's benefits of a local organization. So, you know, one by itself really doesn't address the needs on the ground of agriculture and community. So how do we use both a national and local structure to bring about the benefits of both in a way that is resilient and responsive to the land community and the need to evolve of agriculture on a daily basis because of markets, climate, and so many other things. So these Agrarian Commons, this illustration depicts the commons. It's connected to local community, where the local community is 1/3 of the board. The leaseholders who are on the farms have 1/3 of the board seats. Leaseholders have a 99-year lease structure if state law allows. That's one area where state law does dictate lease term length. So that's our ideal. That works in some states. Other states, it's as low as 15 years. We Agrarian Trust are the last third of the board. We Agrarian Trust help with fundraising, operations, administration side of things, both to support the farm land and farm real estate infrastructure and to support and be part of that Commons board. So this is a new model for us. You know, we've spent we're a new organization, Agrarian Trust. We spent the first couple of years of our existence kind of trying to live into and envision and conceptualize those priority areas around raising the issue for farmland loss and transition, supporting stakeholders and building community common structure. We then brought together committees over a 2-year period of farmers, agricultural support service providers, land trusts, attorneys, financiers, and others from across the country to develop these commons creation committees to really give input into what this structure could look like. We decided on a 501c2 or a 501c25 structure. Those structures are limited scope landholding affiliates of a C3. So they're nonprofit landlords and they're really nothing else beyond that. So they're limited in scope to just holding real estate ownership, managing and stewarding that real estate, and then conveying lease on that real estate. That there's, you know, many types of legal structures that are appropriate for farm businesses, and it differs from one farm to the next. What's appropriate? We're not trying to kind of dictate or prescribe the appropriate legal structure for a farm business. We feel they're all needed, and there's different contexts that might dictate what is the best legal structure. What we're saying is that the land should be held in a nonprofit because of the financial kind of mismatch of farmland values with agricultural production's ability to afford that land because of the commoditization and extraction and speculation that's being done on farmland. And because we're at this point of transition where if we don't move land into some longer term structure, we're just kicking the can down the road another generation when land prices are going to be that much more expensive and more difficult to afford. So, you know, how do we hold land in a nonprofit structure and then remove that barrier and burden from farmers in a way that they can then flourish? So we selected the C2, C25 structure. We worked through these committees to kind of develop the documents and formation structure. All that is captured in a Agrarian Commons toolkit that we partnered with Vermont Law School on. It's open source document available on our website and theirs, and it has all the founding documents, and it has notes and questions from those commons creation meetings we had. And then on May 1st of just about 2 years ago now, we launched this Agrarian Commons model, and we incorporated Agrarian Commons across the country. We now have 14 in 12 states spread across the country in this way. Each Agrarian Commons locally decides their geographic focus area where they work. So some are working statewide, some are working more multi-county focus. So it really differs, but the kind of our Agrarian Trust input into that is that they should be something that looks at a food shed approach. So, you know, where are the farms customers? Where are the farms markets? Where is the community that those farms are connected to? And building a commons that's geographically large enough to focus on that whole area is important. And so of these Agrarian Commons, this is what the boards look like. As I mentioned, they're, you know, majority local stakeholders. As you can see here, most have attorneys on the board. As I mentioned, state law differs quite a bit from one state to the next. So important to have local attorney representation to kind of guide and advise as needed. Many have conservation easements and conservation land trusts on the board. Many have farms on the board. You know, most have projects underway or already owned in them. So really, just to summarize, you know, we were setting up this work to address the primary barriers that farmers year in and year out vocalize, that the high cost of land and the high debt burdens of agriculture make it prohibitive to be financially viable or to stay in agriculture or to transition from one generation to the next to farm. So how do we address that financial barrier? And our goal was around the land piece, moving land into a nonprofit and doing that through philanthropic capital raising and prohibiting the ability to encumber the land with debt beyond a small amount, and prohibiting the kind of ability for the farmer to be burdened by a lease rate or mortgage debt that's above what they can afford. So lease rates are determined by what's financially viable for the farm. They're determined at that local Agrarian Commons level, where the farmers who are going to hold lease are part of that negotiation and discussion. So lease rates differ quite a bit, but they're all targeted to be affordable for the farms. And it's also to address kind of the realities that farmers have to shoulder, regenerating soils and ecosystem, maintaining, installing, repairing infrastructure, barns, you know, all these other things that really, you know, the large industrial ag can remove those costs or externalize those costs from their financials, and in many times get subsidies or tax breaks in doing that. The mid-sized farms do not in many ways. So it's, you know, many times mid-sized farms are burdened with the regenerating of our lands and regenerating of the systems and infrastructure they need simply to operate. And there's nobody else, you know, they do that with debt. There's nobody else to really support that. So through this model, a nonprofit is able to raise philanthropic capital and grants to support that regeneration in soils, repair, restoration, capital needs as well. And really all of this is to support equity. There's a few slides on this. They are on our website with a little more context. These are text heavy here. I'll move through fairly quick, but really the equity piece for us, part is in, you know, a farmer is trading ownership for a lease tenure. So how do we build into the lease ways for the farmer to build equity and have security in the lease, and because they don't have the ownership? So this gets at that in some ways. You know, how can we also build kind of equity in for the the land and the commons itself. So this gets at kind of how we reinvest, how the commons as local stakeholders, and then kind of how do we look at equity overall across all of the commons. And again, these are text heavy. There's more context on our website, and I'm happy to expand on them in questions or follow up. Just to kind of touch on a little more, as we move farms into this model, we're thinking about those acquisition transaction costs to move the real estate in, but we're also thinking about what are the costs to reinvest to regenerate soil health, to reinvest to bring about renewable energy, or to reinvest to think about capital improvements needed, and bringing that in as part of a philanthropic fundraise as well. So the farms are not, individually burdened with that. And, overall, this is to address many realities where, that farmers who have spent a lifetime cultivating soils and community and a healthy business struggle to transition their farms many times. New and beginning farmers struggle to get access to land, and the land they can access many times is needing, soil repair and regeneration, or is such a distance to markets, it makes it very difficult. So how do we kind of help with that transition to ensure, generations of work that's went in to build viable farms isn't sold out to development while new farmers have to find their own path and career getting to the point of where these exiting farmers are? How do we use a nonprofit to remove that land barrier and cost from the transition and allow the business to be the transition point for the farms in a way that is more viable to see the continuation of these farms? And, the knowledge, the health of the soil, the stewardship that's been taking place, the community connections, and everything else that farms build over a career and a lifetime. So that's it. Here's contact info. I'll jump off of this slide in a minute, but here's my email, phone number. Here's links to subscribe to our newsletter, to learn more in different ways. So I encourage you all to kind of stay in touch or reach out with questions you might have. And I'm happy to have those follow-up conversations. And I will stop sharing now, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have.
So I'm in a lot of spaces where they acknowledge the trauma, land theft of people. But what does that actually mean for the Agrarian Trust? And how racially diverse are all of these commons and the folks who actually put this together?
Yeah, good question. So for us, land acknowledgement is important. Land acknowledgement is, just words in one sense. So land acknowledgement and what else is critically important. And so for us, our work is to, acknowledge the history and the people of the land, but it's also what are we going to do about it? And that kind of gets at your second question. So part of that is, as we take in land into this model, we are looking to bring about some type of partnership, some type of relationship, some type of support to Indigenous communities. So it looks quite different from one place to the next. We have land on Whidbey Island. So in the Seattle area of Washington, there's a real rent program that exists where you can simply go online and sign up to pay real rent. So we did that real rent to the Duwamish on day one of land ownership there. And that's kind of a one step and one example, but that was a more public and easily accessible way to directly be returning some money and some acknowledgement. In other cases, we are working to develop cultural use agreements with indigenous communities that are local to that place. So giving legal rights to that indigenous community onto this land. On several of our agrarian commons, that board makeup that I described, three of the agrarian commons we have, community stakeholders on those boards are indigenous people who are local to that region. And those might, what those will develop into, time will tell, but the first step is relationship building there. But, open to and intending to move towards some type of payment, some type of cultural easement, some type of shared use. We also, one of the commons is directly with two indigenous communities in Massachusetts, and it was acquiring land out of private ownership into a process that will rematriate land back to those communities. And the other part I'd highlight, I'd be happy to expand on this another time too, but just one last piece I'd highlight is that, we are a white-led nonprofit. Most of the land projects we've done to date are by and with BIPOC communities. We have racial justice focused projects in Virginia coming about this year to return land back to Black farmers from white land ownership there. So in the Agrarian Commons, they're made up of the communities we're in partnership with. So those look quite different across the country, but they're centered with those communities. So, from Maine, working with the Somali Bantu community, to Virginia, working with Black farmers, to Massachusetts, indigenous communities, to, there's other examples. All are on our website, stories of who the board members are, what the focus of each commons is doing is part of it. The last piece is just that, true land rematriation or land return, like, a nonprofit shouldn't be in the middle of. Like, we should advocate for and support and make pathways to bring about such possibilities. But, if we're standing in the middle, we're just injecting ourselves into a process that really should be returning land to the communities of indigenous people whose land it was and whose land was stolen from them. And, having a white nonprofit be the owner in the middle of that, regardless what the structure is, isn't truly going to solve that.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Can you explain more what the process is like? So say you have an interested group of folks looking to access farmland, and you have an interested owner who's looking to transition their land. What does the fundraising, the capitalization, because of course, unless that owner is directly donating their land, there is likely significant funds to be raised to transition that land. Can you describe the processes?
Yeah. So, right. Like we work from land donation to land purchase. All land purchases we work with are some type of discounted sale. Generally, even the landowner who needs as much as they can get from the property, selling to a nonprofit at a discount, there's some tax benefits to that would offset the tax liability they'd have and the proceeds received. So it's generally, financially equal or beneficial for some type of discounted sale for a landowner. So that's where we work, is some type of discounted sale to a complete donation. But those discounted sales could be 80% of the market value, say. So it, would require considerable money. There is not public funding, federal or state funding for land acquisition for community land trusts, whether a model like us or community land trusts of other types, in the way there is federal and state money for conservation land trusts to protect land with easements. So really the money to bring about this work is private philanthropic dollars, and from foundations, grants to crowdsourced fundraising projects, it's all kind of takes private philanthropic funding to make possible. So we, have to assess that up front, how much money is needed, what's viable, what funding supports might already be identified, how it might be possible to bring about a fundraising campaign. But before that if there's an interesting or an interested landowner willing to exit and sell property, interested farmer, community, that it's really, are there the people and organizations that can come together to incorporate and form one of these agrarian commons structures? And is there a local attorney who can help support that? Are the people who would be the board of that commons, bringing the skills that will be needed, whether it's to support the farm enterprises or is to support the fundraising or public awareness or community engagement, but really that, who are the people who are willing to commit to be part of incorporating this nonprofit community land trust structure? And then if those components are in place, is it a land project that is aligned and viable financially and aligned in kind of mission and priorities? And then we begin to think about a budget and what that might look like.
Thank you.
More questions, comments? I do have a question about, you mentioned that most of your process is relying on philanthropy, but you also said that there are other ways of approaching land access that are through land conservancy or conservation easements that may also be leveraged with philanthropy. Is that the case too?
Yeah, so that's the case, so because there are, there is not enough money for conservation land trusts to protect the land that has to be protected by any means. But because there are federal and state funding programs for conservation easements on farmland, that is a great partner, a conservation land trust, in pursuit of a conservation easement. So whether the conservation easement is already in place, so that reduces the value of the land that we're exploring to begin with, or there's opportunity to partner with a conservation land trust who may be able to bring funding forward, or landowner may be willing to donate that easement and lower the value and get the tax benefits from that. Either way, a conservation easement can lower the value of that farmland considerably. So that is a part of the picture. Conservation land trusts are also great partners to do the work they do. So protecting the natural resources of the farm soils and the ecosystem, and their monitoring and stewardship of that is a great collaborative partner to have involved. So a number of the commons have conservation land trusts and or community land trusts who are those community stakeholders on the board, and conservation land trusts who hold the conservation easements that are also monitoring the property for their goals, but there's some overlap in their goals and our goals. So they can help, with human capacity on the board, they can help with human capacity of connecting the landowner and monitoring land and ensuring soil protection is carried out. They can also help with that funding piece of lowering the cost of the farm real estate.
And have you worked specifically with entities like American Farmland Trust, for example?
Yeah, so, right, so, some land trusts we're working with are more localized to the place we're working at. Some are more regional or national in scope. So yeah, we work with American Farmland Trust. Their Northwest director is on the Washington Agrarian Commons we have and is actively involved there, as is Washington Farmland Trust as well. So there's kind of a national farmland land trust, American Farmland Trust, and a statewide land trust, Washington Farmland Trust, are a part of that board. We're exploring work in New York now in partnership with American Farmland Trust as well. So there's and there's some overlap in our New England work as well with American Farmland Trust. So there's overlap with a number of existing land trusts, because really, as I mentioned in the presentation, that all we're doing is kind of utilizing the great work conservation land trusts, community land trusts, cooperatives, and others have done, and evolving it and focusing it in a way that I've described to you. But it's kind of building upon their work, and so partnering with them only kind of strengthens that kind of approach.
I would also like to hear a little bit about hear you speak of the scale of size of land that is reserved or in the land trust with the Agrarian Trust. There must be, I noticed in your maps that you have big bubbles where out west there's a very big one. In Vermont there's a small one near Lake Champlain, and I didn't see any in Western New York. But if you speak to that scale or the difference in the scale of.
Yeah. So right. So that map was depicting the geographic scope of these Agrarian Commons. So the Agrarian Commons are all starting with 1 to 2 farm properties. The bylaws set an intention that they'll grow over time to hold between 4 and 12 farm properties, and they're not intending to be abutting farm parcels. They're intending to be farms that are aligned in values that all would be within the geographic focus area of that commons, which is intending to be a food shed size. So right out west, the largest bubble you saw was in Montana. Montana is a very large state, but very small population. That Montana Agrarian Commons works statewide in Montana. Some of the other Agrarian Commons also work statewide. Some work in a 4 to 5 county region, say within a state. So it all depends on like, what is that food shed consideration? Like how far do farmers in that region generally drive to market or have customers from, or kind of what are the support services that connect to agricultural enterprises, and what's that geographic area. So that size of an Agrarian Commons differs, and that was what the map shows. Additionally, the individual farms differ, where the smallest farm we're working with is a 12-acre farm on Whidbey Island in Washington. That's a much smaller farm, but it's at a size that it can be a viable vegetable and fruit production farm, and it's close to Seattle and many urban markets. The land costs are considerably high there, and the soils and rainfall allow for kind of acreage of that size for certain types of production to be financially viable. Other parts, like in Montana, we're working with a 8,000 acre grain and crop organic farm in northeastern part of the state. That because of the soils, because of the rain, because of a lot of realities there, because of the production that's going on, like that's the acreage size that's needed there to be a viable farm enterprise. So it differs quite a bit. In general, 100 to 250 acre size, say, would be the more average size farms we're working with, but it does differ quite a bit. You know, all the farms we work with are considering kind of the whole farm. So they're thinking about housing, they're thinking about land for agricultural production, they're thinking about other infrastructure needed. So that takes a certain amount of land. It also takes a certain amount of kind of land rights, you know, zoning development rights associated with it. It takes when there is a conservation easement, it takes a easement that has enough flexibility for that housing, infrastructure, and other needs to also take place.
Do you have any where you have more than one business on the land? Or are these all individual businesses, individual?
Yeah, well, so to date, of the farms that are in the Agrarian Commons, we have individual businesses that are, you know, a variety of legal structures, from nonprofit to LLC to cooperatives. We then have some nonprofits that are more kind of, you know, programmatic areas of that nonprofit that potentially could be considered different businesses, but are housed under a single nonprofit. So, you know, on the nonprofit side of things, like in Maine with the Somali Bantu community, there's 220 families that have farm plots on a single farm. And then there's also a cooperative that is growing flint corn for a market-based business enterprise there. And then there's also other kind of non-farming but land-based programmatic work, whether it's, you know, kind of kids programming or community education or programming. So there's things like that is a diversity now. There's a few projects that are in process now, but we don't yet own them in this model, but we have agreements and we're moving forward with that have multiple farm business enterprises that are, you know, operating on the land and will have individual leases. So, you know, we could have multiple leaseholders like we will with these projects that are in development now. We could have single leaseholder that